Willowbrook was a small town surrounded by dense forest that had a sinister reputation. It was a land of legends and scary stories, but none were as intriguing as the legend of the Moon Trail. The Moon Trail was a narrow, winding path that went deep into the forest. During the day, it was a peaceful place with tall trees and refreshing shade. But at night, everything changed. The trail was said to be haunted by restless spirits that wandered in the pale light of the moon. Alex, a young adventurer and trail enthusiast, has heard about the legend since he was a child. He couldn't resist the call of the unknown and the thrill of the supernatural. He decided it was time to test the legend and find out if there was any truth behind the scary stories. With his determination, Alex invited a group of equally brave friends to join him on a nighttime expedition to the Trail of the Moon. The group included Sarah, his best friend since childhood, who was known for her unwavering courage, and other young adventurers from city. They agreed to meet at midnight at the trailhead, equipped with flashlights, food, and warm clothing for the night. The moon was full, casting a pale light over the forest, creating a scene worthy of a horror film. As the night wore on, the group gathered at the trailhead, eager for the adventure to come. Everyone was excited and a little nervous, but curiosity overcame fear. Alex led the group, determined to find out if the legend of the Moon Trail was just a story made up to scare the town's children. They turned on their flashlights and began walking down the trail, their footsteps echoing in the darkness. The sounds of the night forest were unsettling, with branches creaking and leaves rustling in the wind. Owls howled in the distance, creating an ominous soundtrack to the journey. The feeling of being surrounded by darkness and uncertainty was palpable. As they advanced, a feeling of uneasiness began to spread throughout the group. They exchanged nervous glances and laughed nervously, trying to ignore the shivers running down their spines. They didn't know if it was real fear or just the expectation of the unknown that made them like this. "Do you hear that?" asked Sarah, her gaze sweeping over the shadows of the surrounding trees. The group stopped and fell silent, trying to detect any strange sounds. It was then that they heard something. A whispering, barely audible sound that seemed to come from the surrounding trees. "It must just be the wind," Alex suggested, trying to reassure everyone. But the whisper persisted, as if the trees had a voice of their own, whispering dark secrets that could only be understood at night on the Moon Trail. Still determined to discover the truth behind the legend, the group continued to walk the trail, their flashlights illuminating the winding path ahead. They had no idea what awaited them in the darkness of the forest, but they were willing to find out. As the group continued to advance along the Moon Trail, the forest around them seemed to close in even more. The narrow path became increasingly winding, and the vegetation denser, while the full moon cast ominous shadows between the trees. The strange sounds that echoed in the night intensified. They heard distant laughter, as if invisible children were having fun in the distance. Silent footsteps seemed to follow them, but when they turned to look, there was nothing but dancing shadows. Alex tried to reassure the group, insisting that it was all just a figment of his imagination. But as they advanced into the forest, the feeling of being watched and pursued increased. It was then that something terrible happened. One of the group members, Lisa, suddenly disappeared. They were walking side by side, talking and laughing, and in the blink of an eye, she was no longer there. There was no sign of her, just the darkness of the forest. Panic took over the group. They called out desperately, searched the surrounding area with their flashlights, but found no trace of Lisa. It was as if she had evaporated into the darkness of the night. The group members looked at each other, with looks of horror and bewilderment. It was impossible to understand how someone could just disappear like that. Fear took hold of them all. With their hearts racing, they decided to split into teams and continue the search for Lisa and the other missing members. The forest seemed even more ominous now, with ominous shadows moving and branches twisting like deformed fingers. However, as they advanced, more of the group disappeared. Screams echoed in the darkness, but there were no answers. Desperation took over those who were still together. Alex began to suspect that something terrible was happening. He gathered the few members remaining and decided that the only option was to continue following the trail and reach the clearing at the end. Maybe there they would find answers or help. As they advanced, The strange sounds and whispers of the forest grew louder, as if the trees had their own voices and secrets to tell. Every sound seemed like a warning, but they could not take it back. The only thing they could do was continue their walk to the end of the moon trail, hoping to find a way out or an explanation for the nightmare they were living. As the group advanced along the moon trail, the darkness of the forest seemed to engulf them more and more. The winding path continued, and the light from the lantern seemed fragile against the impenetrable darkness. They heard the strange sounds, the whispers of the forest, growing louder and more unsettling. It was as if the trees had their own voices, whispering ancient secrets that should not be revealed. Finally, after hours of walking, the group emerged from the dense forest into the clearing illuminated by the light of the full moon. The clearing was desolate and eerily silent. There was no sign of the missing members, nor of Lisa or the others. In the center of the clearing, there was an ancient and decrepit statue of a hooded figure. The statue's eyes glowed with a dim light, casting ominous shadows around it. It was as if the statue was watching them, its imposing presence filling the clearing with a dark aura. The group approached the statue cautiously, feeling a sense of uneasiness in the air. They studied the statue, noting its strangely realistic appearance and sinister features. It looked like the statue was waiting for them, as if it knew they would arrive at the clearing. It was then that they noticed something even more disturbing. The statue was surrounded by a series of strange symbols carved into the ground. They were symbols they had never seen before, and their mysterious nature left them apprehensive. It seemed that the clearing was the center of some ancient and sinister ritual. As the group studied the symbols, they heard a low, inhuman sound coming from all directions. It was a strange, unintelligible whisper, as if the forest itself was speaking to them. They didn't understand the words, but they felt it was a warning that something terrible was about to happen. The statue began to move, its broken stone rearranging itself into a more human shape. The party members recoiled in horror as the statue transformed into a hooded figure with glowing, sinister eyes. She approached them slowly, her inhuman whisper intensifying. They didn't understand the words, but they felt it was a warning. Desperate and without options, the group tried to flee the clearing in the hooded figure, but the forest seemed to have turned into a sinister maze. They got lost, running in circles and constantly being chased by whispers from the forest. As the night wore on, the group became increasingly exhausted and desperate. They knew they were trapped on the trail of the moon, trapped in a dark and hopeless reality. The missing members were never found, and now those who survived were lost in the eternal darkness of the haunted forest. The group continued to run through the forest, desperate to find a way off the moon trail, but darkness and confusion overcame them. It seemed as if the forest was playing with them, changing its own path to prevent them from escaping. The whispers from the forest intensified, as if the trees were mocking his desperate struggle. They didn't understand the words, but they felt that the forest was alive in a sinister way, conspiring against them. Exhaustion began to take over the group, and their flashlights were almost out of battery. They exchanged anxious glances, wondering if any of them would survive the night. Every step was a struggle, and fear was constantly lurking. Alex led the group with determination, but even he was beginning to doubt whether there was a way out. He knew they had to keep trying, as standing still in the darkness was not an option. After endless hours of running, the group found themselves in a part of the forest that looked unlike anything they had seen before. The trees were more gnarled, the shadows deeper, and a sense of oppression hung in the air. It was then that they saw something that stopped them in their tracks. A hooded figure stood in the middle of the path, blocking his path. Her eyes shone with a sinister light, and she seemed to emanate an aura of dark power. "There is no escape," said the figure in a voice that sounded like a distant echo. "You belong in this forest now." The group backed away, afraid to approach the figure. They knew they could not face this entity, which was clearly linked to them. "Curse of the moon path. What do you want from us?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. The hooded figure simply laughed, an ominous sound that reverberated through the forest. "You are just another piece in the eternal game of this forest. The night is our ally, and you will never escape." With a gesture, the hooded figure disappeared into the shadows, leaving the group stunned and terrified. They knew there was no more hope, that they were doomed to wander forever on the trail of the moon, like so many others before them. The group remained there, in the oppressive darkness of the forest, feeling the weight of the curse that enveloped them. They heard the whispers of the forest intensify, as if nature itself were crying for lost souls. And so, the legend of the Trail of the Moon remained intact, a dark enigma and a warning to all who dared defy the dark of night. The missing members were never found, and those who survived the night were never the same. The Moon Trail continued to be a mysterious and cursed place, where the moon cast its light on unspeakable horrors, and those who ventured there never returned to the light of day.